Delighted today to introduce our Fireside Chat speaker, Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand, and I'll have a conversation with the Associate Attorney General, which is great. She's the number 3 person at the Department of Justice, and I'm really delighted you could come to Georgia to be here today. Thank you for that. Remarkably, Associate Attorney General Brand is the first woman to serve in this position, so that's an incredible honor. She previously served as an Assistant Attorney General at DOJ for the Office of Legal Policy, and President Obama appointed her to the position of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which is another high honor. She was teaching at the Scalia School of Law at George Mason University before this particular position came along, and she's a graduate of Harvard Law School. So anyway, so great to have you here with us today. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's always good to see Joe Whitley. When I was in DOJ the last time around, Joe was the general counsel of DHS, and I got to know him at that time, and he's been a good friend over the years, and so thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, and we're delighted. And I thought we could start off with talking a little bit about your duties as Associate Attorney General. Some years ago, I was associated with the office, affiliated with it for a period of time, and our duties and responsibilities over the years have flipped. I know when I was there, the associate had responsibility primarily for the criminal side of the department, remarkably, and I think that now falls to the deputy. But could you talk about some of your responsibilities? I believe that includes the Civil Rights Division, Civil Division, Antitrust, the Land and Natural Resources, just a variety of things. So your day must be full, but could you talk about what those responsibilities are in some of those different divisions?
Sure. If you look at the organizational chart of DOJ, you would see there's sort of a civil and criminal distinction. I oversee the 5 civil litigating divisions: the Civil Division, the Civil Rights Division, the Tax Division, the Antitrust Division, the Environmental and Natural Resources Division. And then the Department of Justice is responsible for administering billions of dollars of law enforcement grants every year, and there are 3 components of DOJ that do that work. I oversee them and a number of other components, including the Executive Office of U.S. Trustee, so all the bankruptcy work, and there are a number of other things. So it's a very broad subject matter, so the challenge for me every day is to figure out what to touch of that very broad. So it's primarily a litigation management job, and then I try to carve out time in the day for some proactive affirmative agenda items as well. But it's a lot of meetings, a lot of oversight, a lot of talking to lawyers all around the department about what they're doing.
When I was there, there was just so much paper. One of the more incredible things is I think the change has moved away. So much of what you're seeing, I'm sure, is electronic in terms of the information you're getting from the various divisions about what's happening. So day to day, I know you have to have a really tight schedule, so I know the day's tight, so we won't be able to keep you for too much longer, probably having to say farewell around 1 o'clock because you've got to get back to your duties. But there's a lot going on in each of those divisions that might be noteworthy to talk about. But in particular, one area I know that's been a focus of the Attorney General has been the hate crime prosecutions and things of that nature. Could you talk a little bit about that, sort of generally, without, I know there can't be any specific discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. So in the civil rights area, the Attorney General really has focused on hate crimes. At the very beginning of the administration, this was before, I didn't get confirmed until the end of May, but before I was there, the Attorney General established a violent crime task force, and within that, one of the 5 pillars was hate crimes. And so there's a hate crime subcommittee that's been doing a lot of work on policy issues, but also in terms of prosecutions. Many of those are handled around the country by U.S. attorneys' offices, but the Civil Rights Division has a criminal section which handles those cases as well. It's staffed by some really impressive and experienced prosecutors who are bringing, it's crimes based on race, crimes based on religion, transgender crimes, and the AG has really elevated that as a priority of his.
I wanted to move now to another topic, which if you were not here earlier today, but our first panel was on the False Claims Act, and I think it was a great panel, a subsequent panel on public integrity. But I thought we'd talk a little bit about the False Claims Act, if we could, and I think it's, without a doubt, I guess, some of us in the room are dependent on the False Claims Act, aggressive enforcement. It's kind of odd sometimes you think about that if you're, working.
It's full employment for lawyers.
Right, full employment for us. So keep it up. So we want to keep more. But anyways, the utilization of the False Claims Act to pursue individuals and businesses, is something that we support, as citizens certainly. But I was curious about. There's been some discussion about the emphasis of the department in the False Claims Act area, and I was just curious about, is that emphasis continuing, from the Obama administration, and just sort of some general thoughts you might have about the False Claims Act. I know you served for a period of time at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and so it depends on where you sit sometimes, where you stand on these issues, but.
Yeah, that's right. So the Attorney General, among his priorities is combating fraud, and in particular healthcare fraud. It's a very high priority for him, and therefore it's a high priority for me. There are a lot of tools that DOJ has in the toolbox. Many of them are criminal, but on the civil side, the False Claims Act is undoubtedly the biggest, the most powerful tool that we have. Of course, most False Claims Act cases DOJ does not get involved in. I think we get involved in maybe a quarter of those cases, but it is one of the biggest tools we have. So we are focused on aggressively using it. So for me, I think there are two sides to my focus. One is to make sure that we are aggressively using that tool to combat fraud and recover money for the taxpayer. So I want to make sure that the lawyers in the civil division have the resources and support that they need. Now, obviously, many of those cases are handled around the country by the U.S. Attorney's offices, but in coordination and in some ways supervision by the civil division. But on the flip side, I also want to make sure that the integrity of the system is preserved by making sure that we don't take things, beyond what the law will bear. So there was a recent case in the Sixth Circuit where the department was pretty pointedly criticized by the court for being too aggressive, and the court even called it borderline frivolous in terms of our damages calculation. So, I don't want to see that either, because I think that perhaps undermines the credibility of all the good work that the department is doing. So there's a balance there, and that's something that I'm digging into.
This is the first year of this new administration, and things are just getting underway. There is many of us in the audience have friends who are at our law firms. They have been nominated for positions, and the process of those confirmations are playing themselves out. But also, obviously, the U.S. attorney positions around the country is something that are a focus of everybody, the appointments for those positions and the confirmation process. And as sort of asking for the audience, one of the concerns, or not criticism necessarily, but do you know if there's any sort of goal in terms of confirmations? I think we're talking about 93 U.S. attorney positions, and it took a while, I recall, for my confirmation to take place, which took place later than I wanted it to be. So for a period of time, I was forgotten but not gone at the law firm I was at. But anyway, do you know if there's a goal of some sort to get these USAs on board by 2018?
Well, we've nominated 32 so far, which, contrary to what you might read in the press, is about double what the Obama administration had done by this date. So I think we're doing pretty well in terms of the pace of nominations. There is another batch that it's going to be nominated any day. I can't tell you which day because I don't know, but it's literally any day now. And there are a lot of others in the pipeline. The DAG and the AG spent a lot of time. Picking U.S. attorneys is not within my bailiwick, but the AG and the DAG spent a lot of time on that. They're in on weekends interviewing candidates and so forth. So the goal is, I think, as fast as possible. We have 5 confirmed so far, and obviously we'd like the Senate to move as fast as they can, but it's not as though no one's minding the store while the Senate confirmed U.S. attorneys are waiting to be confirmed. I just was having lunch and a meeting with a number of the acting U.S. attorneys, and so we feel like the department's already in really good hands, but we'd like the Senate to move as fast as they can to confirm our nominees.
Yeah, I'd like to think that I was invaluable and irreplaceable when I was in those positions, and certainly that wasn't the case, and particularly so in Atlanta and Macon, 2 offices I served in. Just great career people there. So that's something the public really doesn't fully appreciate sometimes. That the same applies, I believe, for Main Justice, having served there. And again, some observations. Those positions, I assume, are going through the same process, people being evaluated.
Right. So So the Senate confirmed folks at DOJ so far, the AG, the DAG, and me, and then very recently, two of our, I think there are 12 assistant AGs, were confirmed, the legal policy AAG and the Ledge Affairs AAG. But the others, I mean, I really would love to have the Senate confirm those assistant AGs for all the divisions under my supervision. But we do have very good acting AGs in place. Just yesterday, there was a Senate confirmation hearing for Eric Dryban to be the assistant AG for civil rights. And, some of the others are pretty far along in the confirmation process too. So hopefully soon. And it is a really, for the nominee sitting as you did in the law firm waiting to be confirmed could be a very excruciating process for the nominee. So for their sake too, I hope they're confirmed very soon.
The things that if you think about when you're in these positions, it seems as though you're going to be in the position forever, a number of years. And you wake up one morning and you're back in private practice like me. But one of the things that you try to think about are things you want to accomplish. It's a great honor to have been chosen to be in these positions, and the sacrifice you make to be in these positions is something people probably can't appreciate sometimes. But as you think about what you want to accomplish in the time you have, what are some of the objectives that you see that you'd like to reach, and then goals? And again, if you have 5,000 objectives, you'll never accomplish anything, but there must be a handful of things that you're thinking about right now as Associate Attorney General.
Well, my job, I would say 95% of my day is management. So it's litigation management, and there's just so much it's litigation management, it's grant management, and it's managing the other components that I supervise. So the challenge is really to find time in the day to do something affirmative. But in terms of the management, my overriding goal is to ensure the highest professional standards and the rule of law is observed by the department's lawyers. And I'm also looking at whether there's any guidance about settlement practices or the conduct of litigation by the department that the field may need. So that's part of a management goal. In terms of affirmative policy agenda, something I spend a lot of time on lately is human trafficking. I'm particularly focused on sex trafficking. The Civil Rights Division has a human trafficking prosecutions unit that focuses on both forced labor and sex trafficking with adult victims. And cases with child victims are prosecuted by the criminal division. But there is, I think the problem is more prevalent than the public probably understands. What I'm hearing from prosecutors around the country and from both state and local and federal law enforcement is that these cases are undercounted because, for example, in the adult victim sex trafficking cases, it's hard to prove some of the elements of that crime, and the sentences aren't very high. So they'll be charged as a gun crime or a drug crime instead, and therefore the resources may not be following because the numbers aren't there in terms of prosecution. So I've been spending time taking a look at that and taking a look at how our grant money can be better used to serve victims and therefore help law enforcement bring those cases better. One other thing that I'm focused on is regulatory reform. So the president early on issued 2 executive orders sort of focused on making sure that the government abides by the spirit and letter of the APA, making sure that when regulatory agencies do their work, they're using the right process and they're staying within the bounds of the law. And so I'm chairing the DOJ Reg Reform Task Force, and there's a new thing called Regulatory Reform Officer in all of the big agencies, and I'm serving that role for DOJ. And so it's a big project, and we're just getting that underway.
In terms of the actual the human trafficking component, that's an extremely laudable objective. I know, speaking of that, John Horn and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta has been aggressive in this area. The human trafficking being maybe the sex trafficking being a subset of human trafficking. But anyway, to commend them is important to note their accomplishments. I assume you're working also in that regard with state and local law enforcement or others?
Yeah, so in a number of jurisdictions around the country, there are task forces, state, local, federal task forces focused on human trafficking, some of which are funded by DOJ grants. I was in Cincinnati recently talking with the Bureau, HSI, which is the new name for ICE, the Sheriff Department, the Police Department, and nonprofits. There, the Salvation Army actually sort of coordinates that with many different law enforcement agencies there in terms of serving victims during the prosecutorial process. So yeah, we're very engaged with them, both in terms of operations and in terms of funding.
Obviously, regulatory reform is an important objective, and this president has made it an objective. So I look forward to watching that space with you and see how that moves along. I suppose now it's just sort of thinking back on life in a blender. That's what I would describe my life in Washington some days. One of the things I wanted you to share with the audience, and many of you will have an opportunity to serve in the Department of Justice or other key positions in this audience, and then also perhaps in Washington. But what is a typical day like for Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand? I know it must start very early, end very late, and you're probably never disconnected from many things that you're responsible for. But so where does it begin? And I guess the question is, does it really ever end? I guess it probably doesn't.
Well, so there's no typical day except that almost every day, if the AG is in town, the AG and the DAG and I meet at 8:20 in the morning for about 45 minutes to kind of go over the day. And, are there things that are urgent, things that we need to bring to the AG's attention? It's not like that's the only time I see the AG during the day, but there's kind of a set time that we can all kind of get together. But beyond that, I'm in a lot of meetings. I mean, I look at my calendar every day, and if I'm in the office 12 hours, I've probably got 15 meetings. I mean, it's a little ridiculous, to be perfectly honest. But so if there's any over sort of theme, it's just a lot of meetings. But yeah, I want to constantly be touching the people in the department to understand what they're doing, to give guidance, but beyond that, it's sort of whatever's. You try not to let the immediate be the enemy of the long term. You try to carve out that time for good management, for a long-term agenda. But it's a lot of fire drills of what's hot that day.
As I recall, in some of the meetings that I attended, there would be 3 rows of people. And I think one of the accomplishments maybe of the Bush administration, 43, is they eliminated the 3rd row. But anyway.
You mean in the room around the conference table?
In the room around the table. So I know that.
I don't like to travel in packs. That's
right, but it's
I try to, as few people as possible.
But you know what I'm talking about, so that the people at the table didn't have any clue about what was being talked about, and the people in the 2nd row knew a little bit more, and the people in the 3rd row actually knew more about anything than anybody in the first 2 rows. So it was one of those kind of challenges that you go through in a huge bureaucracy. But anyway, I applaud you for your patience in attending those meetings. One of the things that I think you're doing through the Office of Justice Programs and other components is working again with state and local governmental entities through grants and other programming, which I think is one of the key initiatives that I have the most interest in. And so that pushes money out to state and local entities to help them with local programs. Is there anything you could share with us about that?
Well, there are 3 main grant-making components of DOJ. The Office of Justice Programs is the biggest one, and it houses the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is the main grant-making component of DOJ. It also houses some sort of almost academic entities like the National Institute of Justice, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and others. So OJP is one. Then you have the Office for Violence Against Women, and the COPS office, which is Community-Oriented Policing. And each of them have different grant programs. I would say the problem is that there are so many grant programs, you have to think about whether they are duplicative, but most of them are directed and mandated by Congress. Congress will say the COPS office should spend its money on the following 5 things. For example, all 3 of those components have their own human trafficking specific grant programs. So it's good that there's money there, but one of the challenges for me is to make sure that that money is being used the most effectively and efficiently in terms of serving victims and helping law enforcement. But where there is discretion in spending the money, we try to make sure that the money is aligned with the Attorney General's priorities and is just plain used efficiently.
Hearings on Capitol Hill, I know you haven't really had an opportunity to do too many of those, and I'm sure those may be coming up, where you'll be providing testimony. But one area that I found to be somewhat confounding sometimes was just the interaction with all the other cabinet agencies. And I'm assuming that there may be some cabinet agencies that you have more interaction with than others. But is there anything in that area that you could share with us? So
DOJ is in the perhaps unique position of interacting with virtually every agency in the federal government because we represent almost all of them in court. So with the exception of independent agencies like the SEC, we are the lawyers for the government. So in my current capacity, we are interacting with all of them in that respect. When I was the AG for legal policy, my job was to sort of develop major policy initiatives for the Department of Justice, which necessarily involves clearing them within the administration. So I spent a lot of time, that meth was a big issue for us back then. So working with HHS and the White House, and we had the DEA inside of DOJ, but the Department of Homeland Security, everyone, might want to touch a particular policy issue. So, the policy offices of DOJ still do that. DEA wants to take pseudoephedrine off the shelf. HHS doesn't want to, then you have to work that out through the White House, So there is both a collaborative aspect to that and a sometimes adversarial aspect to that.
Do you have, and just sort of a final question from me, then maybe a wrap-up question or a comment from you would be nice to hear. In terms of interaction with the White House, the Office of Legal Counsel at the White House, with the President's attorneys, I'm guessing that there are contacts you have with that office from time to time?
Yeah, so the Office of Legal Counsel is in DOJ, and then the White House Counsel's office at the White House, where I worked years ago, actually, at the beginning of the Bush administration. There's a White House contacts policy. So for specific matters in litigation, we're very formal about our procedures about whether lawyers in DOJ can talk to people in the White House. And there's a procedure that people have to go through, and I have to personally authorize contact with the White House counsel's office in any particular case. But there are many, matters in litigation that are of interest to the White House, either because they have major policy implications or because an executive order is being challenged or whatever. And so yeah, there is a fair amount of interaction. It's not, I would say, a major part of my day, but it's certainly there, yeah.
I'm a proud member of the American Bar Association, and we have Sandy Weinberg here, who's chair of the criminal justice section, sitting in the front row. And one of the things that I'm really pleased with today is that you've taken so much of your day to make an effort to be here at this American Bar Association meeting, and on behalf of my co-chairs, I really appreciate it. So I wanted to just ask you, do you have some thoughts or comments about the American Bar Association as an organization, and how we could do a better job, perhaps connecting with the department and working with the department. And not that we'll always agree on issues, but nonetheless, I think having a dialogue. And I recall even in the past, the ABA really loved Attorney General Ed Meese because he opened his doors for a dialogue, and we really appreciate what has been a two-way street for opportunities to have conversations with you and others in the department. And that goes all the way to the Attorney General, who's been very willing to speak with us. So thank you for that. But any comments?
Well, thank you for having me. I don't have a long history with the ABA, but I was, when I got confirmed to this job, I had to quit all of my committees and all my nonprofit boards and everything. But until that point, I was the co-chair of one of the subsections of the ad law section. But look, our door is always open. When I was an OLP, the ABA came in to talk to us about the then Thompson memo and a variety of other things. And so we're always open to hearing, good ideas and complaints too, frankly. If you think there's a way that DOJ can improve the way it litigates or anything else, I want to hear about it. So, give me a call.